We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the indictment, first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Mrs. Adelson, control yourself.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala, out of Florida, following the guilty verdict in the matriarch mastermind murder trial of Donna Adelson. More jurors are speaking out. It only took the jury about 3 hours and 15 minutes, to reach this verdict last week. Adelson was left in tears and disbelief when she was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy and solicitation to commit first-degree murder in the death of her ex-son-in-law, Dan Markell. We are now hearing from another one of the jurors in the case who sat down with Scripps News Group reporter Maya Sargent in Tallahassee. Juror number 6, Evan Higginbotham. Now, he reveals how they arrived at their guilty verdict.
Going in, I was leaning towards guilty after seeing all the evidence laid out. And I did my best to try to stay on the fence and not lean in one direction until we got in there to the deliberation, because I did feel like she deserved to at least have that unbiased bit.
And so tell me, when you walk in that room, what was sort of some of the first things? Was everyone kind of stunned? What was sort of the reaction when you got inside the room?
Yeah, I expected for all of us to immediately start talking, for it to be an eruption of speech, and it really wasn't. It was kind of silent, and everyone was kind of, so where do we start? And it kind of took us looking at the jury instructions to really get the ball rolling to talk about it.
Yeah. Where did you start when you say we didn't know where to start?
Well, we first started by breaking the silence by going, well, who wants to be the foreperson? And then kind of passing around the idea of who wanted to do it. And JC had, throughout the entire week, talked about how she would be happy to be the foreperson. I think she was the only one that really wanted to do it. Yeah. So everyone was like, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's perfectly fine by us.
And I'm curious, when you're sort of going through, you saw so much witness testimony, so much evidence. For you, did you take notes throughout the trial? How did you sort of keep log of it, keep track?
Yeah, I did. I know there were a lot of bigger note takers than me. I think I only used 4 pages worth of notes, which most of those were honestly in the first 2 days when I was trying to write down everything. But I felt like halfway through the first week, I felt like I wasn't really taking as good of notes as I probably should. I was just kind of writing down everything, which I felt like wasn't helping me retain the information as much. So by the end of the trial, on the last few days, it was just me jotting down points that I felt were important for deliberation.
Yeah. And so you get inside that room, you said you were on the fence, or you tried to be on the fence whilst you had those conversations. What were those steps look like till you decided on the verdict?
Yeah, so when we got in there, we first started by laying out and going just count by count, starting with count 1 of first-degree murder, and then going around and seeing how everyone felt about where we're currently standing on just this specific one and not overarching. And everyone, at that point in time, I felt pretty comfortable. I was leaning towards a guilty verdict. And there were a few people on the jury that weren't so sure, especially after going through the jury instructions, because you have to be very specific in the way that you go about coming to your verdict. Finding intent before the murder was being committed was one thing that a few people were hung up on, because when you're looking at the broad scope of all the evidence, so little of it comes pre-murder. It's really at the next years after the fact where most of the evidence against her was collected.
Of course. And was there sort of standout evidence for you that made you go, she's guilty?
For me, the bump operation was a big part of that, and the code. Innocent people don't speak in code, and that was what really was pushing me towards a guilty verdict. Her, as well as when the operation happened and she was handed that sheet of paper, just taking the paper and putting it straight into her bag without looking at it. I'm not taking anything from anyone and putting it in my bag before looking at it.
And yeah, I was going to say that I think that bump operation for a lot of people really solidified it. Was there any witness testimony that sort of sold it for you, or that sticks out in your mind when you think back to it?
Rob was a big state of character, I felt like, because he's got so much insight to her as a person that we don't get to see. Because I'm not supposed to use any of my impression of her being on the bench there. So I did my best not to pay any attention to her and just base my thoughts on her based off of the testimony and evidence presented.
And you mentioned some of those holdups in the jury room. How long did it take for you to sort of work through and deliberate those to come to 12 jurors agreeing unanimously that she was guilty?
For count one, we spent probably the first hour, 45 minutes or 2 hours of our 3 and some change that we were in there just talking about the first count and laying out all the evidence and digging through everything that we wanted to go back and look at again. Once everyone laid out the evidence and we had spent some time, about an hour and a half, an hour 45 minutes just looking at count one, then the other 2 were a lot easier to go back and make our decisions on.
Sort of you had the guilty verdict for count one, and then it sort of helped sort of line up the evidence for count three.
Because at that point we had broken down so many different things and laid out. So we even pulled out some of the phone calls again to go back through them and the transcripts before.
All right, let's bring back in our guest. Joining us still, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Marsha Minot, former federal prosecutor and president of West Coast Trial Lawyers, Nima Rahmani. And Marsha, I'll start with you. It's always fascinating to hear jurors talk about that process and just how hard they do work to reach justice. They take it very, very seriously. What jumped out at you about some of the things that he mentioned about the deliberation process in this case?
The first thing that jumps out at me is that it appears that he was leaning towards guilty at the gate and was struggling with trying to keep a fair and impartial mind as the evidence came in. That interview concerns me because if appellate counsels use it, they can come back and say, hey, this juror violated his oath because his testimony or his statements in this interview was that he was leaning towards guilty and was fighting to try to lean towards not guilty and reserving judgment. That's not how it's supposed to work. She's supposed to start off with not guilty. And then as the evidence comes in, you lean towards the guilt and then find that. So that's really what jumped out at me, an appellate issue that may be raised by this interview.
Nima, I want to send that to you. I didn't quite see his comment that way. I thought his comment was, after listening to all the evidence, he went into the room with this idea that maybe it sort of added up to guilty, but he wanted to keep an open mind, which is what they're asked to do. Not going into the trial, do you agree with Marsha? And what's your take on that issue?
I agree with you, Michael. I read it as at the close of evidence and after closing statements when he went into that jury deliberation room, he was leaning guilty, which is appropriate. But, Marsha makes a good point. Look, as a former prosecutor, any lawyer, whenever you get a good verdict, you cringe when the jurors speak because the last thing you want is for them to say something that may create an appellate issue, like they discussed something inappropriate or some evidence that was excluded or wasn't even presented came into that jury deliberation room. Here are my really 3 key takeaways. And like you said, it's fascinating to get a peek behind the curtain. But what you think as a trial lawyer is important may not be the most important evidence for the jurors. And obviously in this particular case, the jurors thought the bump was important. It was. For me, it was the one-way trip to Vietnam, someone that's fleeing. But obviously that wasn't a big deal. The second thing that I took away, I thought solicitation would be the hardest of the 3 counts to prove because, again, Donna was removed from McBanawa, at least one step removed. And the jurors really spent most of the time on her being a principal, and then they moved to conspiracy. So that was a key takeaway for me. And the third was the discussion of Wendy. And juror number 6 said that they really didn't spend too much time on Wendy. They followed the instructions. But of course, the big question everyone is asking is, will Wendy be charged, right? What about Harvey? But everyone's focused on Wendy. I've gone on record and saying I don't think she will. But the fact that the jurors had that same question was one thing that really stuck out to me.
Yeah, quickly in the last 20 seconds, Marsha, I agree. Hearing that made me think that at least they thought there was something there as far as Wendy is concerned. Your thoughts on a possible prosecution of Wendy?
Oh, that's going to be tough because there's some immunity that was granted to Wendy prior to these trials occurring. And I know they were limited and the state got the outcome they wanted. They needed Wendy's testimony so they can convict her brother and her mother, and they got it. So to go back now and to try to, to come back on those agreements and then use Wendy and go back and try her, I think that's going to be tough. I don't see the state doing that.
All right, when the prosecutor was asked after the trial, she said, stay tuned. Same thing she said when she was asked about Donna, so we shall see. All right, stand by, guys. Coming up on the other side of the break, Evan Higginbotham recalls what key evidence made up the deciding factor in finding Donna Adelson guilty of murdering her ex-son-in-law, Dan Markell. That's next here on Court TV Live.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, the jury has spoken in the kiss and kill murder trial, and we are live with reaction. Find out what's next for Samantha Krebs as our experts weigh in.
Closing Arguments, tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
Saturday nights on ION
is our night.
Let's go! Double headers every Saturday at 7 and 10 p.m. Eastern. The new Saturday Night Out is on ION all season long.
Was there sort of standout evidence for you that made you go, she's guilty?
For me, the bump operation was a big part of that, and the code. Innocent people don't speak in code, and that was what really was pushing me towards a guilty verdict. Her, as well as when the operation happened and she was handed that sheet of paper, just taking the paper and putting it straight into her bag without looking at it. I'm not taking anything from anyone and putting it in my bag before looking at it.
It's amazing how jurors use their own common sense, their own life experience to come to their conclusions. And we're watching the interview with juror number 6 in the matriarch mastermind murder trial of Donna Adelson. Evan Higginbotham, he explained how he and a group of 11 others arrived at the guilty verdict last week after deliberating for just over 3 hours. He says the length of deliberations didn't surprise him at all. Let's listen in to his interview with Scripps News Group reporter Maya Sargent.
Were you surprised at the time that it took you to deliberate? Was it shorter or longer than you expected?
It was honestly about where I expected it to be. I felt, at least, I can't speak for everyone else, I felt going in there that I felt pretty comfortable and that I knew how I was leaning on this. As unbiased as I tried to stay all the way until the end, at that point I had pretty much made up my mind. And I felt that everyone would probably be in that same spot that I was, which I think everyone was pretty much in the same position.
Yeah. And I'm curious because this was such a huge, it felt like this was a huge trial for all of us. I was amazed that we were able to find a jury. I always said, I'll be amazed if we find a jury that still hasn't heard about this case.
Right.
How was it that you hadn't heard about it or any of the trials beforehand?
Yeah, I was really young when Mr. Markell passed. I was 13 years old, turning 14 that year. And I didn't pay attention at all. I was a pretty big goofball, so I wasn't looking at any local news or anything like that, and neither of my parents were really paying attention to much local news at the time. And then as I got older, I moved away and was living in Gainesville from 2019 to 2023.
Okay.
And so
You missed all of the...
yeah.
Wow.
So I had heard when Mr. Markell passed away, I heard that there was that someone was murdered, but that was the furthest that I knew about it.
I know you mentioned the bump operation and Rob Adelson's testimony. Was there anything else that sort of came up for the jury when you were deliberating that you sort of kept going over?
We talked a lot about phone records in there and the text
between Donna and Charlie.
Right, and some of the phone tracking stuff.
Yeah.
Whenever Donna sent the outside your house text was part of it, because that's one thing that does show intent a little bit prior to the murder actually being committed.
Yes.
That's one of the few pieces of evidence prior to the murder actually happening.
And I'm curious, I know you said you tried to focus on just the witness testimony or just who was speaking. Were you paying attention to Mrs. Adelson's husband or other sort of members in the gallery, I guess?
Whenever we would have pause, and which there was quite a bit, as you know, in there, I would kind of be looking around and looking at people, but I wasn't trying to dig in or take note at all or read into their behavior or anything. I really tried to act like Miss Adelson wasn't there, because her behavior there doesn't change whether she's guilty or not, or if she's innocent, and I need to presume that she's innocent, even if I were to think she was acting in a strange way.
Yeah. And I was going to ask about, there's been a lot of speculation about, now I'm sure you know that Mrs. Adelson is the 5th person convicted in this chain of really unfortunate people connected to Mr. Markell's murder. Did you have discussion about any other suspects in that room?
Not really. We briefly spoke about Wendy Adelson, but she's not the one on trial, so we tried to stay focused and follow the jury instructions and stay only discussing Donna's part in this. We spoke about Charlie in some points, but him being convicted has nothing to do with whether she was involved or not. So we really tried to stay focused on the evidence and follow Judge Everett's instructions.
And sort of looking back on the last 2.5 weeks, what was sort of like the overall, if you could sum it up in a phrase, what was it like for you?
This was an incredible experience for me personally. I was intrigued and fascinated the whole way through. I know that some of the time the evidence that was presented was kind of hard to get invested in, like the phone calls that we were digging through for 5 hours, but for most of it I was able to stay pretty intrigued. And I came out on the other end of this fully, I actually went and changed my major. I've been talking about this now. I'm now going for a pre-law degree from engineering.
Wow, because of this experience?
Yeah. It was a lot of it because of the way the prosecution represented themselves, and Ms. Kappelman I was insanely impressed by, and it made me want to go and pursue a career in that. I think walking out of there, we all expected to have some sort of feeling of like accomplishment after serving the verdict, but the overarching feeling at the end of it is really just sad that we're all there.
I was going to ask about that. Any sort of lingering feelings of, I don't know.
It's a little weird trying to get back to like normal life after it. I mean, having to get caught back up with school and work now has been a challenge, but it was absolutely worth it to have been a part of this experience that many people will never get to be a part of.